I was never one to believe in the supernatural, especially not in the kind of haunting possessions you read about online. But after my experience as an exorcist, I can say with certainty that some things in this world defy explanation. This isn't an easy story to tell, but I feel that people need to know that evil, true, twisted evil, exists. It began with a late-night phone call from a desperate woman I had never met. Please, she begged, her voice breaking with fear. You're my last hope, my daughter. She isn't herself. I don't know what to do. Her tone held a level of urgency that I hadn't heard before, and despite the warnings from my mentors to only take cases referred through official channels, something told me that this was important. More important than I could have imagined. I agreed to meet them the next day, hoping it would be a simple matter of counseling, maybe a psychological issue. Little did I know it would be anything but. When I arrived, the house felt off. You could feel the tension in the air, a thick, oppressive weight pressing down on you, as though something sinister was watching from the shadows. The family was gathered in the living room, huddled together in silence. The mother looked exhausted, her face pale and drawn. Her daughter sat across from her, eyes dull and fixed. On the floor, as I introduced myself, the girl's gaze snapped up, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Her eyes were empty, hollow, like staring into a void. The mother took me aside, explaining the disturbing behavior her daughter had been exhibiting. She speaks in voices that aren't hers. Her strength, it's impossible. She's done things no one should be able to do. Her voice trembled, and her eyes darted nervously toward her daughter. We tried doctors, psychologists. Nothing has helped. She's getting worse. Please, I'm begging you, help her. I took a deep breath and turned back to the girl, who was still staring at me with that unsettling gaze. The words, "I'll try my best," barely left my mouth before she began to laugh. It was a low, mocking sound, filled with malice. You think you can help me? She sneered, her voice dripping with contempt. Her voice wasn't that of a young girl. It was deep, guttural, filled with hatred. My blood ran cold as she continued. You're just as powerless as the others. You're nothing. The family recoiled, and I knew then that this wasn't just a case of mental illness. This was something darker, something far more sinister. I steeled myself, drawing upon every ounce of training I had, every prayer and scripture that had been drilled into me. I began the exorcism, my voice steady, though inside I was trembling. But as I spoke the words, the room grew colder. Shadows seemed to gather in the corners, shifting and writhing, as if they were alive. The girl thrashed and screamed, her voice a cacophony of rage and hatred, but her eyes remained fixed on me, unblinking, mocking. She spat insults, foul words I can't repeat, her voice changing with each phrase, as though different entities were fighting for control. Who are you? I demanded, my voice shaking. Her lips twisted into a cross smile. I am many, she hissed, and for a moment, her face contorted into a monstrous visage, something that looked both human and inhuman, a blend of features that defied logic. Then, just as quickly, her expression returned to normal, and she looked up at me with the same mocking gaze. The exorcism went on for hours, a brutal, grueling ordeal. Each prayer felt like a battle, each word a struggle against the force that had taken hold of her. Her body twisted and contorted in ways that should not have been possible, her face twisting in pain and fury. I could feel myself weakening, my voice hoarse, my energy draining. But I couldn't stop. I wouldn't stop. This thing, whatever it was, couldn't be allowed to. As the night wore on, her screams grew louder, more frantic. She clawed at her own skin, drawing blood, her nails tearing at her flesh as though she were trying to rip herself apart. The family was in tears, watching in horror as their daughter was consumed by this dark presence. The mother clung to her husband, sobbing, praying desperately for a miracle. Then, in one final, blood-curdling scream, the girl's body went limp. The room fell silent, the oppressive weight lifting, replaced by a calm that felt almost unreal. She lay there, her chest rising and falling shallowly, her face pale, but peaceful. I knew then that it was over. We had won. Or so I thought. After the exorcism, the family thanked me profusely, their faces edged with relief and exhaustion. The girl was still weak, her eyes glazed and distant, but there was a sense of peace about her that hadn't been there before. She clung to her mother, her voice barely a whisper as she murmured, "I'm so tired." I reassured them that this was normal, that recovery would take time, and that they should keep a close eye on her in the coming days. As I left the house that night, I felt a strange sense of unease lingering in my chest, but I brushed it off as exhaustion. After all, I had just come face to face with a darkness few people would ever encounter, but that wasn't the end. Not by a long shot. Over the next few days, strange things began to happen. It started with the girl's behavior, at first subtle, almost unnoticeable. She would zone out during conversations, her eyes unfocused, her mind somewhere far away. Her mother told me about finding her in the middle of the night, standing motionless by her bedroom window, staring out into the darkness, whispering to herself when asked what she was doing. The girl would only respond, listening. Listening to what, exactly? She couldn't say. She claimed she heard whispers, faint and distant, calling her name from beyond the window. "They're not gone," she'd say, her voice eerily calm. "They're still here." Her parents tried to dismiss it, chalking it up to the trauma of the exorcism. They convinced themselves that it was just a lingering effect, that she would eventually return to normal. But the whispers continued, growing louder each night, filling her dreams with strange and twisted images she would describe in vivid detail, as though she were experiencing them firsthand. I received a call from the mother one evening, her voice trembling with fear. She's not my daughter anymore," she whispered. "There's something in her eyes. It's like she's watching me, waiting for something. I don't know what to do. Please, you have to come back." When I arrived, the girl was sitting in the corner of her room, her body rigid, her eyes fixed on the far wall. She didn't acknowledge my presence, didn't even flinch when I called her name. It was as though she were in a trance, her mind locked away somewhere beyond our reach. As I approached, her head snapped around, and I felt a familiar chill run down my spine. Her eyes, they were no longer the soft, innocent eyes of a young girl. They were cold, empty, filled with a darkness that seemed to swallow the light. "You think you can stop this?" she whispered, her voice low, mocking. It was the same voice from before, the same malice dripping from each word. A sickening realization washed over me. The exorcism hadn't worked. The entity hadn't been banished. It had simply gone dormant, waiting, hiding, biding its time, and now it was back, stronger than ever. Over the following weeks, things only grew worse. The girl's behavior became increasingly erratic, her moods shifting wildly from one moment to the next. She would laugh hysterically at nothing, her laughter echoing through the house like a twisted melody. Other times, she would fall into a deep silence, staring off into the distance, as though listening to something only she could hear. Her parents were at their wits' end. Their once happy home now a prison of fear and despair. They confided in me that strange occurrences had begun happening around the house, objects moving on their own, doors slamming shut with no one around, whispers echoing through empty rooms. The air felt thick, heavy, charged with a sense of foreboding that left them constantly on edge. One night, they found the girl standing in the middle of the hallway, her eyes wide, her face twisted into an expression of pure terror. When they asked her what was wrong, she simply pointed to the shadows and whispered, "They're here." She refused to say anything more, her body trembling as she backed away, her eyes never leaving the darkness. Desperate, her parents begged me to perform another exorcism, hoping that this time we could finally rid their daughter of the evil that had taken hold of her. I was hesitant, knowing the risks involved, but I couldn't turn them away. Not when their daughter's life was at stake. I prepared for the ritual, steeling myself for the battle that lay ahead. This time, I would be ready, or so I thought. The second exorcism was unlike anything I had ever experienced. As I began the prayers, the girl's body convulsed, her eyes rolling back, her mouth contorting into a twisted grin. She laughed, a horrible, mocking sound that seemed to echo through the room, filling the air with a sense of dread that was almost tangible. "You think you can stop me?" she sneered, her voice a chorus of different tones, each one filled with hatred. "I am eternal. I am everywhere. You cannot defeat me." The air grew colder, the shadows lengthening, twisting into shapes that seemed almost human. I could feel their presence, a suffocating weight pressing down on me, filling me with a primal fear that I hadn't felt since my first encounter with the darkness. As I continued the prayers, the girl's body twisted and writhed, her skin pale, her veins darkening, as though something were coursing through her that didn't belong. She screamed, a sound so guttural, so inhuman, that it sent shivers down my spine. Her eyes glowed with an unnatural light, a sickly yellow that seemed to pierce through the darkness, watching me, taunting me. The entity fought back with a fury I hadn't anticipated, lashing out, its hatred filling the room like a storm. Each word of the prayer felt like a struggle, my voice faltering, my strength waning as the darkness closed in around us. Then, in a final act of desperation, I called upon every ounce of faith I had left, my voice rising in defiance. In the name of all that is holy, I command you to leave this child. You have no power here. The room trembled. The shadows were calling. They are thick with tension as the entity fought to maintain its hold. For a brief, terrifying moment, I thought it would win, that its strength would overpower mine. But then, with one final scream, the entity released its grip, and the girl collapsed, her body limp, her breathing shallow. The silence that followed was deafening, a stillness that felt almost sacred. I approached her, my heart pounding, praying that it was finally over. When she opened her eyes, they were her own, once more filled with fear and confusion, but free of the darkness that had haunted her. The family wept with relief. Their daughter finally returned to them, the nightmare seemingly at an end. But as I left that house, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, that a door had been opened, a door that could never be fully closed. To this day, I'm haunted by that experience, by the darkness I encountered, a darkness that feels closer than ever. I've come to realize that evil doesn't simply vanish, it lingers, waiting, watching, always searching for a way back into our world, and sometimes it finds one. Days turned into weeks, and I found myself unable to shake the eerie feeling that had taken root deep within me. At first, I dismissed it as lingering anxiety, a natural response to such a traumatic experience, but then strange things began to happen. I started waking up at exactly 3 o'clock a.m. every night, my heart pounding, my room filled with an oppressive silence that felt almost alive. It wasn't the quiet that unsettled me, it was the feeling that something was there, watching, waiting. I would lie in bed, my eyes fixed on the shadows that seemed to stretch and shift in the darkness, my mind racing with thoughts of what I had encountered in that house. One night, as I lay there, the silence was broken by a faint whisper. It was so soft, almost inaudible, yet unmistakably there. "You can't escape," it hissed, the words sending a chill down my spine. I sat up, searching the room, but there was no one there, just the darkness, pressing in on me, filling the air with a sense of dread that made my skin crawl. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, a side effect of the trauma I had experienced. But as the nights went on, the whispers grew louder, more insistent, filling my mind with dark, twisted thoughts that felt alien, like they didn't belong to me. I could feel the darkness creeping in, clawing at the edges of my sanity, pulling me deeper into a nightmare I couldn't escape. During the day, I tried to keep myself busy, hoping that the routine of work and prayer would provide some relief. But even then, I could feel its presence, a shadow that lingered just out of sight, watching, waiting. I started seeing things out of the corner of my eye, fleeting shapes, twisted figures that would vanish the moment I turned to look. My colleagues noticed the change in me, the exhaustion, the constant unease that had taken hold. But I couldn't bring myself to explain. How could I make them understand the terror that had taken root within me? Then the visions started. They would come without warning, flashes of twisted images that would invade my mind, filling me with a terror I couldn't control. I would see the girl's face, her eyes hollow, her mouth twisted into a cruel smile. She whispered words I couldn't understand. Her voice would echo in my mind, dark and taunting, reminding me that the darkness was far from gone. One night, I had a dream, or perhaps it was more than that. In the dream, I was back in the house, standing in the same room where I had performed the exorcism. The air was thick with a sense of malevolence, the shadows writhing, alive. I could hear the girl's laughter, a mocking sound that echoed through the room, filling me with a sense of dread that left me paralyzed. Then she appeared, her eyes glowing with that sickly yellow light, her face twisted into a grotesque smile. "Did you really think you could get rid of me?" she sneered, her voice a chorus of different tones, each one more sinister than the last. I tried to speak, to pray, but the words caught in my throat, my voice silenced by the weight of the darkness that surrounded me. She stepped closer, her eyes boring into mine, filled with a hatred so intense it felt like it would consume me. "You opened the door," she whispered, her voice dripping with malice, "and now you'll never be free." I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart racing, my mind filled with the echo of her voice. I tried to convince myself it was just a nightmare, a product of my own fears, but deep down, I knew it was something more. The entity hadn't been banished, it had simply found a new target, and now it was coming for me. The following days were a blur of fear and paranoia. I started hearing voices during the day, faint whispers that would drift through the air, taunting me, reminding me of the darkness that was closing in. I would see shadows moving in places they shouldn't, fleeting glimpses of twisted figures that would vanish the moment I turned to look. One evening, as I was leaving the office, I felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of dread. The air grew cold, the lights flickering as a shadow moved across the hallway, a dark, twisted figure that seemed to watch me, its eyes glowing with that sickly yellow light. I froze, my heart pounding, as the figure began to move towards me, its form shifting and writhing, a twisted mass of shadows that seemed to defy logic. I turned and ran, my footsteps echoing through the empty halls, the sound of laughter following me, a mocking, sinister sound that filled the air with a sense of dread that left me breathless. I didn't stop until I was outside, the cold night air filling my lungs, my mind racing with the terror of what I had seen. That night, as I lay in bed, I could feel its presence, the darkness pressing in around me, filling the room with an oppressive weight that made it hard to breathe. I tried to pray, to banish the darkness with words of faith, but my voice was weak, my resolve shaken by the horror that had taken hold of my life. The whispers grew louder, filling my mind with twisted thoughts, memories of the exorcism. The girl's face twisted into the cruel smile, her voice echoing in my mind, reminding me of the door I had opened, a door that could never be closed. Days turned into weeks, and I found myself slipping further into the darkness. My nights were filled with nightmares, visions of twisted faces, dark figures that would whisper my name, their voices filled with malice. I could feel myself changing, the darkness taking root within me, filling me with a sense of dread that left me constantly on edge. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard a familiar voice, soft and taunting, drifting through the darkness. "You can't escape," it whispered, a cruel smile in its tone. "You're mine now." I sat up, my heart pounding, my eyes scanning the room for any sign of movement. But there was nothing, just the darkness, silent and watchful. Waiting. It was then that I realized the truth. The exorcism hadn't just failed. It had backfired in my attempt to banish the entity. I had opened a door that had allowed it to enter my life, to take hold of my mind, my soul, and now there was no escaping it. The darkness had found a new home, a new victim, and it would not rest until it had consumed me entirely. As the days go by, I can feel myself slipping further into its grasp, the shadows closing in, the whispers growing louder, filling my mind with a darkness that I cannot escape. I am haunted by the face of the girl, her twisted smile, her mocking laughter, a reminder of the evil that I had encountered, an evil that now holds me in its grip. And so, I leave this story as a warning to those who seek to confront the darkness, to face the unknown. Be careful what doors you open, for some things cannot be banished, cannot be defeated. They linger, waiting, watching, ready to take hold of those foolish enough to believe they can stand against them. For I am living proof that evil does not simply vanish. It moves, it shifts, it finds new prey, and once it has its claws in you, there is no escape. So, if you ever find yourself facing the darkness, remember this. Some battles are not meant to be won. Some battles are meant to consume you. The terror became relentless. Each night, I awoke to the same mocking whispers, the same shadowy figures lurking just beyond my vision. My life began to unravel, piece by piece, the darkness creeping into every corner, every aspect of my existence. I became a shell of my former self, haunted by visions that I could no longer tell apart from reality. The people around me noticed the change. Colleagues grew distant, concerned murmurs following me as I walked through the halls, my skin pale, my eyes hollow, and ringed with exhaustion. My family pleaded with me to seek help, to talk to someone, but what could I tell them? How could I explain the unspeakable horror that had taken hold of me, the malevolent presence that now clung to my every breath? One evening, I returned to my apartment only to find that the air was thick with an unnatural stillness. The shadows felt heavier, denser, as if they were pressing down on me, enveloping me in their cold, suffocating grip. I tried to ignore it, to push the fear aside as I went about my evening routine, but as I walked past the mirror, I froze. My reflection stared back at me. But there was something wrong. My face was pale, my eyes sunken and empty, as if the very life had been drained from me. And then it smiled. Not my smile, this was a twisted, malevolent grin, a mockery of joy filled with malice. My reflection leaned closer, its eyes glowing with that sickly yellow light that I had come to dread. "You look tired," it whispered, the voice dripping with disdain. "Losing sleep, are we?" I stumbled back, my heart racing, my mind reeling from the shock. I turned away from the mirror, trying to shake the image from my mind, but the laughter echoed in my ears, filling the silence with its sinister melody. I started to avoid mirrors, afraid of what I might see, afraid of the face that would look back at me, a face that was no longer my own. I could feel the darkness creeping into my soul, tainting my thoughts, twisting my mind with whispers of despair and hatred. I tried to resist, to hold on to whatever shred of sanity I had left, but it was a losing battle. The entity was always there, lurking in the shadows, watching, waiting, its presence a constant reminder of the power it held over me. I could feel it growing stronger, feeding of my fear, my desperation, my hopelessness. Every night, it grew bolder, its voice louder, its laughter more mocking, as if it knew that I was slipping further into its grasp. One night, as I lay in bed, I felt a cold hand rest on my shoulder, its touch like ice against my skin. I froze, my body paralyzed with terror, as the whisper filled my ear, soft and taunting. "You're mine," it hissed, its voice a chorus of hatred and malice. "You can't escape me. You belong to me." I tried to scream, but no sound escaped my lips. I was trapped, helpless, at the mercy of the darkness that had taken hold of me, a prisoner in my own body, my own mind. And as I lay there, paralyzed by fear, I realized the horrifying truth. I had lost the battle. The darkness had won. Days turned into weeks, and I felt myself slipping further and further into the abyss. My thoughts grew darker, twisted by the malevolent presence that had taken hold of my mind. I began to see things that couldn't possibly be real, shadows that moved on their own, faces in the walls, twisted and contorted with expressions of pain and despair. My own face would appear in windows and mirrors, twisted into that same cruel smile, watching me, mocking me, a constant reminder of the evil that had claimed me. One evening, as I was staring out the window, I saw something that made my blood run cold. In the reflection, I saw myself standing behind me, my face twisted into that same cruel smile, my eyes glowing with that sickly yellow light. I turned around, but there was nothing there, just the empty room, silent and cold, but the reflection remained staring back at me, its smile growing wider, more sinister, as if it were waiting for me to break. I turned away, unable to bear the sight, but the image was burned into my mind, a permanent reminder of the darkness that had taken hold of my life. As time went on, I began to lose touch with reality. I couldn't tell if the voices were real or if they were just figments of my imagination, products of my fractured mind. I became a prisoner in my own home, afraid to leave, afraid of what I might see, what I might do. The darkness had consumed me, taken over my mind, my body, my soul. I was no longer myself. I was a hollow shell, a vessel for the malevolent force that now controlled me. I tried to pray, to call upon whatever faith I had left, but the words felt hollow, empty, as if the darkness had drained them of their power. The whispers grew louder, filling my mind with thoughts of despair, thoughts of surrender, thoughts of ending it all. And in that moment, I realized that this was the entity's plan all along, to break me, to destroy me, to leave me as nothing more than a twisted, broken soul, consumed by the very darkness I had tried to banish. One night, as I sat alone in the darkness, the whispers filled my mind, louder than ever before, a chorus of voices, each one dripping with malice and hatred. "You will never be free," they hissed, their words a dagger to my soul. "You are ours, forever." And as I sat there, consumed by despair, I felt a strange sense of acceptance, a resignation to my fate. The darkness had won, and there was no escape. I was its prisoner, its puppet, forever bound to the evil that had taken hold of me. And so, I leave this story as a warning to those who dare to face the unknown, to those who believe they can stand against the darkness. Evil is real, and it is relentless, unyielding, and unforgiving. It will find you, it will break you, and it will consume you, leaving nothing but a hollow shell, a twisted shadow of the person you once were. So remember this. Some battles are not meant to be won. Some battles are meant to destroy you, to leave you as nothing more than a reminder of the horrors that lurk in the shadows, waiting, watching, ready to claim their next victim. And if you ever find yourself face to face with the darkness, remember this warning, and turn away, for once you open that door, there is no turning back. The darkness will find you, and it will never let you go. As the days grew darker, I began to lose all sense of time. Reality and nightmare became indistinguishable. The lines between them blurred beyond recognition. My thoughts, once my own, were now twisted, darkened by the malevolent presence that had consumed me. I was haunted by visions of twisted faces, disembodied whispers, and shadows that moved with a life of their own. There was no escape, no peace, no hope. In a final, desperate attempt to regain some semblance of control, I returned to the house, the same house where this nightmare began. Perhaps it was a foolish impulse, the last vestiges of my broken mind searching for a way to end the horror. The family had moved out months ago, unable to bear the memories of what had happened there. The house was empty, silent, as if waiting for me. As I stepped inside, I felt the darkness close in around me, the familiar weight pressing down on my chest, suffocating me. I walked through the empty rooms, my footsteps echoing through the silence, each step heavier than the last, and then I heard it, the laughter, a mocking, twisted sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. I knew then that I had made a mistake. I had returned to the very heart of the darkness, and it had been waiting for me, biding its time, knowing that I would come back. The shadows gathered, swirling around me, their forms shifting and writhing, faces twisting into expressions of malice and despair, and in that moment I realized the truth. The darkness had never left. It had been waiting for me, watching, following me, feeding of my fear, my despair, my hopelessness. It was never about the goal. I was the true target all along. As I stood there, surrounded by the shadows, I felt a strange sense of peace, a resignation to my fate. The darkness had won, and there was no escape. I was its prisoner, its prey, and now I would become a part of it. And as the shadows closed in, swallowing me in their cold, suffocating embrace, I heard the voices one last time, a chorus of hatred and malice, whispering the words that would haunt me for eternity. You're ours, forever. Thank you for joining us on this haunting journey into the darkness. If this story sent shivers down your spine and left you questioning what might lurk in the shadows, be sure to hit that like button and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe in the supernatural? Have you ever experienced something that defies explanation? We'd love to hear your own stories of the unexplainable. If you enjoy horror stories, true life tales, and spine-chilling mysteries, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss our next tale of terror. Until next time, remember, some doors are best left closed, and some battles are best left unfought. Stay safe, and keep an eye on the shadows. Thank you for watching.